Good evening, and welcome to another episode of the Prince Hall Think Tank, a monthly conversation amongst Prince Hall Freemasons where we discuss um, topics relative to craft masonry. My name is Brother Antonio Caffey, and I will serve as one of your hosts tonight. I'm a proud past master of St. Mark's Lodge number 7, located in Columbus, Ohio, where worshipful brother Vance Williams serves as worshipful master. Our lodge was chartered in 1852 by the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Ohio, where currently the Honorable Chester C. Christie serves as Most Worshipful Grand Master. Before I let the other brothers introduce themselves, as always, I would like to state that the views and opinions that are expressed by us this evening in no way reflect the views and opinions of the Grand Lodges and lodges in which we hold membership in. Also, if you have any questions, please feel free to post them on our Facebook page or by using the chat option on our YouTube channel. And while you're on YouTube, please, if you haven't done so, hit that subscribe button so you can stay up to date with all things Think Tank. At this time, I'll let the other brothers introduce themselves, starting with Brother Morgan.
Good evening, everybody, and happy Black History Month. My name is James R. Morgan III. I'm coming to you from the nation's capital, Washington, D.C., where I am a proud member and past master of Corinthian Lodge number 18, where worshipful Master Davian Gregory serves as our current master. I also have the pleasure and honor of serving as the Grand Historian and Archivist of the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of D.C., where the Honorable Quincy G. Gant is presiding as our Grand Master here in the nation's capital. I'm so thrilled to be here with you all in the Prince Hall Think Tank for Black History Month, and I'm just really excited to see my brothers. It's funny. It's like whenever we do the show, it's like we have a whole month, and then it's like before you know it, it's here again. So I'm always excited to see the brothers and have the conversation.
Yep. Thanks, Brother Morgan. Brother Jack.
Good evening, everyone. Brother Damian Jack. Bid you greetings from Paul Drayton Lodge, number 7, a proud past master, Paul Drayton, number 7, where worshipful brother Lonnie McBride serves as our worshipful master. I also bid you greetings from the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of North Carolina, where the Honorable Daniel L. D.T. Thompson serves as our 24th Most Worshipful Grand Master. It's an honor and a pleasure to be with you this evening. Definitely been looking forward to this show and can't wait to kick it off.
All right, thank you, brothers. And Brother Gillarm, unfortunately, couldn't be with us this evening. He sends his regards as always. So tonight, in honor of Black History Month, we're going to focus on the role that some Freemasons played during and after the Civil War era. And if you think about it, and I was as I was putting together my presentation, and actually when I generally read about the history of Freemasonry during this time period, one of the things that I find most remarkable is that Prince Hall Freemasonry was already well in existence. You know, we had been around for numbers and numbers of years, making a significant impact to society. So I had the presentation, at least that I'll be doing tonight. I had the honor and the privilege to present it at my during my last lodge meeting, or portion of it during my last lodge meeting, and I just couldn't get past the fact that while the story that I was telling, the particular lodge that I was a member of, we were already again in existence. So just to have that thought, or just to think about this amazing story is going on while members of my lodge is having a meeting and living their lives, and now I'm a part of that legacy, I think is something that's fascinating within Prince Hall Freemasonry. So tonight, we hope to profile a few of those members and discuss their interesting stories. So without further ado, let's jump right into it, and we'll start with Brother Morgan.
Man, I'm gonna let you all in on a little secret. I'm not talking to these two. I'm talking to our Prince Hall Think Tank universe out there. They always throw me out first because they want me to embarrass myself. That's what they do. I'm the appetizer. They get the main course. It's okay though. It's all right.
Bro, we always got to give you first dibs. We got to test the waters. It's like drinking the water first before we drink.
Okay, got you. Okay, I get you. All right. Well, Tonight, I'm going to be talking about somebody who's near and dear to my heart, both right now, literally and figuratively. Um, Somebody who I found within Prince Hall Freemasonry is well respected as he should be, and whose life I think should be studied um, even more so as time goes on. And I speak to you of Martin R. Delany, who was a very important Mason, very important philosopher, physician, uh, publisher. I mean, his resume is very long. And I will be perfectly honest with you in saying that my presentation tonight most likely will not do him full justice. I mean, we could do a whole show just on him and on different aspects of his life. Okay. And when I said that he was literally and figuratively close to my heart, I was being quite honest. I'm actually wearing a Martin Delany sweatshirt. Yes, I have a Martin Delany sweatshirt. Yes, I do. He's somebody who I already was very interested in his life before becoming a Mason. And when I read the book Black Square and Compass, for those who have it, there's a chapter in there called Martin Delany, Militant Master Mason. After reading that chapter by the late Joseph A. Walks, that is actually what took me from being on the fence about whether or not I wanted to become a Prince Hall Mason. And after reading that, that's what made me decide that this was an organization that I wanted to join. So without further ado, I present to you my presentation on Martin R. Delany. Let's see here. Let's go to share screen. All right. And you all should see, you all see that? You all see my presentation?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
All right, very good. And what about now? And you still see it?
Yep.
All right, very good. Okay, so Martin Delany, the Militant Master Mason. Here's some basic facts about his life and genealogy. He was born May 6, 1812 in Charlestown, Virginia, which is today West Virginia, to his parents, Patty, who was a free woman, and his father, Samuel Delany, who was enslaved at the time of Martin's birth. His paternal grandfather, his name was Shango Peace, and he was said to be a Yoruba prince from around modern-day Nigeria, and that becomes very important later on in Brother Delany's life. His paternal grandmother, Gracie, and his grandfather, Shango, were actually betrothed in Africa, and they were captured together and brought over, and through a miracle, they were able to actually stay together once they arrived in the United States. And I think this is very important to understand. I've read several books on Martin Delany's life, and one of the ones that I want to recommend to you all is his autobiography, The Life and Public Services of Martin Delany, which he had written by an author named Frank A. Rollin, who actually was a pen name for a female author. In any case, this is very important because the very first chapter of this book is called his genealogy, and where he talks about how important the fact that he had his grandparents was to his identity and his pride in being an African. So whereas many other African Americans at this period were dealing with broken family lines, Martin Delany had a very clear and living link to his African past because he was raised with his grandmother in the house. And that becomes very important to his self-image and to his philosophy later in life. Following his childhood, Martin Delany, he learns how to read and write. He grows up. Eventually, his family relocates to Pittsburgh, and he becomes very interested in the practice of medicine. He becomes a leecher, and for those who don't know what that is, during much of modern history, when a person got sick, you had this practice called leeching or bleeding. The idea was that there were toxins in your blood, so if we cut you and let you bleed enough, that those toxins will get out and you'll get better. Another thing that was done at this time was they would actually apply leeches to your skin in the hopes that the leeches would suck out the poisons and toxins that were making you sick. Now, of course, today in 2020, this practice seems absurd, but this was actually considered modern medical science during much of Martin Delany's life. As a matter of fact, even after it went out of fashion, Martin Delany still was kind of practicing this later in his medical career. But moving beyond that, Delany also takes an interest very early in publishing. He writes several treatises, and he eventually, through giving lectures and speeches about the importance of abolition, he ends up linking up with the man you see in this slide here, Frederick Douglass. The two of them first become very, very good friends. They come together to actually publish the North Star together as co-editors and co-owners or what have you. They eventually have a falling out, and one of the reasons, there were several. One of the reasons why they had this falling out is because if you look at Frederick Douglass, you look at Martin Delany, you really begin to see this issue between the Black nationalists and the Black integrationists. Okay, whereas Martin Delany is very proud of having his African grandparents and his African heritage, and he identifies as he's an African and what have you. Frederick Douglass, although we do honor and respect Frederick Douglass's life and work for sure. Those of us who know, Frederick Douglass is believed to have had a white father. The idea of integrating into America, and you have to remember at this time, as we'll talk about in a moment, Martin Delany is becoming a part of a movement of saying, hey, we all will not get justice in America. We need to go back to Africa. People like Frederick Douglass are saying, no, no, no. We've been in America. This is our home. This is where we were born, and we're going to make America what it needs to be. Eventually, this dispute ends up separating the two former friends, and they actually become somewhat. They have a very contentious relationship for much of the rest of their lives because of their differing visions. Another thing that is said that also played a role in their dispute was Martin Delany's membership in the Masonic fraternity. Frederick Douglass was not a Mason. He was not a Prince Hall Mason. And it has been reported that he actually had some very negative things and negative opinions of Prince Hall Freemasonry, which, of course, with Martin Delany being a dedicated Prince Hall Mason as he was, which we'll talk about momentarily, that also didn't sit well with the two friends either. So, the rise of a Black nationalist. Again, Martin Delany is considered a father of Black nationalism and of the Pan-African struggle as a philosopher. One of the things that Delany does, on top of, not only does he publish his thoughts and his opinions, but he also begins traveling not only in the United States, but eventually he goes to Canada as well as back to Africa, as well as, and he does make a trip to Europe as well. This worldwide perspective that he ends up getting becomes an inspiration for one of his most important works of literature. And I want to highly encourage everybody to go on Amazon, go to your local, well, no, let me take that back. Go to your local bookstore, or go to Amazon, or wherever you go to get your books. I want to highly encourage everybody to get a copy of Martin Delany's book, Blake or the Huts of America. This is a novel that he wrote where he imagines this enslaved individual named Blake, who actually travels around from plantation to plantation, across countries even, and organizes a mass slave rebellion. Martin Delany's book, Blake, actually is written as a response to Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin, where he actually creates this narrative of saying, hey, if we can organize across these national boundaries, we can actually topple the oppression that we are facing as Black people. And he publishes this originally as a serialized novel in the newspapers, but you can actually get a copy for about $20, $30 online. And I highly encourage everybody to get that book and to read it. So these are the type of things that Delany is doing very early on in his career, and that we should always remember and hold dear and sacred. Okay. But Blake was not the only thing that Martin Delany wrote. You'll see here a list of his publications, as was the style in the 1800s. Some of them can be, they had very long-winded writings or what have you, titles for their writings. The thing I want to point out to our viewers here on the Prince Hall Think Tank is, if you look at the second work there, if you look at the picture, he penned a book called The Origin and Objects of Ancient Freemasonry, Its Introduction into the United States and Legitimacy Among Colored Men, in 1853. Now, this pamphlet is especially noteworthy because it is considered to be the first book on African American, or what we call Prince Hall Freemasonry, ever. prior to this, you did have people writing about Prince Hall Freemasonry from the perspective of, writing short essays, writings. We have the writings of some Prince Hall Masons, but Martin Delany sits down and pins this short history where he traces Prince Hall Freemasonry and the claim for African people to be legitimate Freemasons, where he traces it back to the ancient world. Martin Delany is very important, also as an early Black anthropologist to some extent, and so he looks at what the ancient world was doing as far as going back to the ancient Egypt, ancient Israel, what have you, and says, well, basically, if they had masonry in all these places, if you look in the Bible, all these places where they say that the Masonic rituals come from, well, these are all places where Black people come from. So who are these white Masons of today in the 1800s to tell us that we are not legitimate? This was a very, very powerful statement, very powerful move. And again, I want to encourage everyone to get, add all these texts to your bookshelves and make sure that you read and study them. But especially as for the Prince Hall Think Tank audience, make sure you get a copy of The Origins and Objects of Ancient Freemasonry. It's a very important text, and every Prince Hall Mason and Eastern Star should have a copy on their shelf. So let's talk about Martin Delany as a Freemason. Delany, it is said he actually receives his degrees in Europe while he's over there. And I believe it was in Carrickfergus, if I'm not mistaken, is where it's claimed that he received his degrees over in, I believe that's Ireland. He affiliates with St. Cyprian Lodge, which still, if I'm not mistaken, Brother Caffey, St. Cyprian Lodge still exists. Am I right, Brother Caffey? Okay.
I'm sorry, I believe so, yes.
Yeah, very, very good. Thank you. And so he affiliates with St. Cyprian Lodge and becomes a master there, what have you, a worshipful master. Now he's around at a very important time, as we've talked about in previous episodes. When you get into the 1840s, you get these disputes between Pennsylvania Masons, which results in the establishment of two different Grand Lodges there that are fighting, and this results in the formation of the National Grand Lodge of Ancient York Masons, which was a system that was in place for a very long time, and we've had a discussion about the split and what happened with it and everything. Go back and check those episodes out. But Martin Delany is there at this time, and he's actually appointed as a National District Deputy Grand Master for the National Grand Lodge over the Western states. Freemasonry was a very important part of Martin Delany's personal and professional life, and he was very, very dedicated to it for much of it. He ends up having some problems, however, in later years in the 1860s, because, as we'll talk about momentarily with his political career, Martin Delany ends up making somewhat of a mistake in that he runs for lieutenant governor of South Carolina after the Civil War, and the person that he ran against, Brother Caffey, you want to tell me who it, you want to tell our viewers who it was? Brother Caffey, you there? Well, I'll tell y'all who it is. He runs against Richard Howell Gleaves, who was the National Grand Master at the time. So you've got a National District Deputy running against the National Grand Master, and this ends up resulting in Martin Delany's summary exit from the Masonic fraternity, not so much because he wanted to, but because it was claimed that he didn't pay his dues, and there's some shady stuff that was going on there. But we know that Martin Delany, was very dedicated to the craft of Freemasonry, and he's been honored several times. I'm sure I know by the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Ohio, as well as by Pennsylvania, I'm sure. So yes. Now, during the Civil War, it's important to note where Martin Delany is at the beginning of the Civil War. Delany is actually in Africa. He travels to Liberia, Sierra Leone. He ends up in Nigeria, in the Niger River Valley, which is actually the origin, as I mentioned earlier, of his family. He goes back there, and he goes back there on a mission to try to find land for African Americans to travel back to. It should be noted that Martin Delany actually originally he was somewhat skeptical of what happened in Liberia, and he wrote some very negative things about the Liberian government and the experience of blacks there. But when he travels there, he finds they're very receptive of him, and so he ends up changing his opinions. He actually does get contracts for land in and around Abeokuta, which is a city I've actually been to myself, and he's planning on trying to have his own Back to Africa movement. But then the Civil War starts, And so what he does is he comes back to the United States and he petitions the government to allow for the creation of an all-black military force officered by black officers as well. And he actually says that if they form what he calls a Corps d'Afrique of black men, that they will go throughout the South, not only to win the war, but the reason that they win the war is because they will also arm the enslaved men and women to rise up against the Confederacy. One of my mentors, Dr. Greg Carr, professor at Howard University, chairman of Africana Studies at Howard, once said that when Delany meets with President Lincoln here in Washington, D.C., that he was so radical that President Lincoln must have figured that they should give Delany some guns, or Delany might have shot the president or somebody. He was so dedicated to this cause, and so he ends up being enlisted into United States colored troops, into the United States Army, and he's rises to the rank of major, which is very important. You got to think about this. At the time Delany was born, black men and women are considered chattel property, but now, as we see him here dressed, they end up becoming. He ends up becoming an officer in the United States Armed Services, fighting a war that ends up ending the enslavement of people of African descent in this country. Truly, truly a remarkable thing that we have to note. Something I missed that I should have mentioned on a previous slide is that a lot of people don't realize Martin Delany actually, in his medical career, also attended Harvard University. He went to Harvard Medical School. He did not graduate because white students actually petitioned to have him, and there were two other males, if I'm not mistaken, and one female student who was being admitted, and they ended up being put out of Harvard Medical School because of this, unfortunately, because of racism. So again, this is a person who was enslaved. He already lived this extraordinary life, and then he becomes a hero of the Civil War. Very important that we recognize this. Martin Delany, following the Civil War, lived a very, very charmed life. As I said earlier, he goes to South Carolina for several years. He tries to run for lieutenant governor there. That does not work out. But he spends the rest of his life still championing the cause of black liberation and black freedom. And we see here his final resting place. And on one of these images, you see our very own Antonio Caffey laying a wreath at his gravesite a few years back. And so I wanted to make sure that I included this to show that not only with Brother Caffey and the brothers here in this picture, but that I think it's wonderful that Prince Hall Freemasonry has not forgotten the service and the sacrifice of Martin Robinson Delany. He was a truly remarkable individual, and as I said at the beginning of this lecture, I could not do him full justice in the time allotted, but I wanted to give you a taste, and I hope that you'll go back and read some more. And before I turn the microphone over, I want to show you all just one more thing. A lot of people do not know that one of my many hats that I wear is I actually serve as a curatorial consultant for the African American Civil War Museum and Memorial here in DC. Here's a quote from Martin Delany. I'm sorry. Delany said, "Every people should be the originators of their own destiny." I think that's very important that we highlight that as well. Now, as I was saying, I serve as a curatorial consultant at the African American Civil War Memorial here in DC and the Civil War Museum. We're actually expanding at the end of this year into a new building. And so I want to encourage you all, if you come to Washington, D.C., to come visit with us. That's actually my second job outside of my 9 to 5. And I wanted to highlight the memorial, because a lot of people don't know that it exists. I want you to come and visit with us. If you see on the memorial on the silver plates behind the memorial statue, you'll see the names. If you come visit with us, you'll see the names of every single United States colored troop, except for those who served in the Navy, listed on those plates. So I want you to encourage you to come visit with us. And if you see on the second picture there, I want to give you another reason to come visit with us, because the Civil War Memorial actually sits right next to the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of the District of Columbia, which you'll see our building in the back on that second picture there. So with that being said, you all have two reasons to come visit us here in DC and come check out U Street. And I hope that when you come, that maybe if I'm around, we'll sit in fellowship. So with that being said, Thank you for your time and attention.
Morgan, thank you. And being our leadoff hitter, as always, definitely put us in a good position to proceed as well as make it hard to follow you. So once again, I don't know why I put you first, because now it's going to be hard Jack myself to follow.
It's okay.
I always forget. Like, don't do that. All right, thanks, bro, for that great presentation. Brother Jack, what you got for us this evening?
Well, unfortunately, I have the undaunting task of following that presentation. I want to thank Brother Caffey for putting me after this dude. I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I'm going to do the best I can. When this topic was decided, it was pretty difficult for me to choose who I would speak about this evening. As we know that there were a lot of brothers, a lot of men who also happen to be Freemasons who contributed a lot to the Civil War, either before, during, or after. But seeing as how this coming week, my jurisdiction is celebrating 150 years in existence. It was my honor, duty, and honor to discuss our very first Grand Master by the name of Bishop James Walker Hood. So that is going to be my presentation for this evening. Can everybody see it?
I'm adding to it now. Everybody should be able to see it now. Yes.
Okay.
Floor is yours, sir.
All right. Thank you, sir. So as I said, my presentation is on Bishop James Walker Hood, who was first Grand Master, most worshipful Grand Master of our jurisdiction. Bishop Hood was one of 12 children. He was born May 30th, 1831 in Kennett Square, Pennsylvania. His father, Levi Hood, was the minister of the Union Church of Africans and Abolitionists. Now, the Union Church of Africans, or what is also called the African Union Church, was founded by a free slave named Peter Spencer in 1813 in Wilmington, Delaware. His mother was Harriet Walker Hood, who was also an abolitionist. What's important to know about the Hood household is that the Hood household was on the Delaware state line. And during the time of the Underground Railroad, it was used as a station or a safe house during the Underground Railroad. So as slaves were coming up the north, once they would cross the Delaware state line, because Delaware at that time they still practiced slavery while Pennsylvania did not. So during that time, when they reached the Delaware state line, the home of the Hoods was actually used as a station, or what they called a station, or a safe house. Bishop Hood was granted a license to preach in New York by Reverend James Councey, who's a pastor of the African Union Church. He was received on a trial basis by the African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church while in New Haven, Connecticut, at the New England Conference in 1859, and was appointed to preach in Nova Scotia. In 1860, he was ordained a deacon, and for the next 3 years, he was assigned to churches in Nova Scotia, Hartford, and Bridgeport, Connecticut. In 1863, he was appointed by Bishop Joseph Jackson Clinton to be a missionary, and was assigned to come to New Bern, North Carolina in 1863 to replace John Williams to preach to newly freed slaves. Now, according to the book "The Fire for Freedom," New Bern Seaport served as a headquarters for the Union regiment. Both ex-slaves and freed blacks together in New Bern, they organized schools, relief societies, and self-help associations. In January of 1864, Bishop Hood arrived to New Bern, North Carolina, and under the invitation of Union General Benjamin F. Butler, Hood was allowed to preach to black soldiers stationed in New Bern. Now, Hood was not officially commissioned as a chaplain for the troops, but the black troops there did refer to him as their chaplain. And he was also there in New Bern when it was attacked by the Confederates around May of 1864. But at that time, the Confederates were defeated. Now, to understand the role of Civil War chaplains, it is stated that approximately 3,700 chaplains were commissioned during the Civil War. You had roughly 2,400 for the Union and 1,300 for the Confederacy. Most of them were considered hospital chaplains, and this frustrated a lot of chaplains because a lot of times when they wanted to hold church and be able to deliver their message, they were frustrated over lack of space to provide service. So they had to provide service out in the open. This was because wherever there was open space, especially during the war, if the hospital needed to build a tent for injured soldiers at that time, they would occupy that space. And so at that time, building a tent for the hospital was more important than providing space for church service. So they would have those whatever space was left, it would be used for the churches, and a lot of times it would be just out in the open. But also, the chaplains did more than just provide a sermon or to give word. They actually had to, in certain areas, they had to lift patients, carry supplies, perform basic medical procedures such as dressing wounds. And also, they recorded the last words of dying soldiers. They had to conduct funerals and relay those last words to the families. And they also wrote letters for soldiers who were unable to write. So once again, although he was not commissioned as a chaplain, being invited to do so and to give the word, that was one of the roles that Bishop Hood had. What you see here is what is now known as St. Peter's AME Zion Church, but at the time it was originally known as Andrew's Chapel. Now, Andrew's Chapel had the second largest African American congregation in the state. Prior to the Civil War, there was approximately 1,000 free blacks and slaves who attended this church. He preached at this church for 3 years, and he was able to persuade Andrew's Chapel and Purvis Chapel in Beaufort, North Carolina, to join the AME Zion and come under the umbrella. And so now AME Zion, of course, Andrew's Chapel was changed, the name changed to St. Peter's AME Zion Church in 1879. It is now considered the Mother Zion Church in the South. Bishop Hood was one of the founding members of the North Carolina Conference of the AME Zion Church. And in 1872, at the General Conference right here in Charlotte, North Carolina, he was elected as the 17th Bishop of the General Conference. A lot of the work that I found as I was looking up Bishop Hood, a lot of the work that I found that he did post-Civil War. He was elected president and presided over the first statewide convention for blacks, which is a part of the Colored Conventions movement. Now, the Colored Conventions movement was a series of national, regional, and state conventions held regularly during the decades preceding and following the American Civil War. The delegates who attended these conventions consisted of free and fugitive African Americans, including religious leaders, businessmen, politicians, writers, publishers, and abolitionists. The first documented convention was held at the Mother Bethel AME Church in Philadelphia in September of 1830, and the first convention president was Richard Allen. Now, of course, we all know that there's 6 degrees of separation because Bishop Hood's mother, Harriet, prior to her marriage to his father, was a member of the Mother Bethel AME Church in Philadelphia. Bishop Hood was also the assistant state superintendent from 1868 to 1871. During that time, he established and supervised schools for African Americans. He was also the assistant superintendent of the Freedmen's Bureau in North Carolina. Now, the Freedmen's Bureau is was an agency of the United States Department of War, which was started by President Abraham Lincoln. This was used to direct such issues as provisions, clothing, and food as they may deem necessary for the immediate and temporary shelter and supply of destitute and suffering refugees and freedmen and their wives and children. Now, this was only supposed to last for 1 year after the Civil War, but it was renewed by Congress every year until 1872. Bishop Hood was also a delegate for the Republican Party at the 1872 National Convention and temporary chairman for the State Republican Convention in 1876. What you see here in is Livingstone College. For those who attended, Livingstone College was originally the Zion Wesley Institute, which was founded in Concord, North Carolina, in 1879. Excuse me. It was open for 2 years, but had to close in 1881. And during that time, after the closing, Dr. Charles Price, along with Bishop Hood, became fundraisers with the mission to reestablish the Zion Wesley Institute. Dr. Price was able to raise $10,000 while in England. And in 1882, they relocated to Salisbury, North Carolina, with gifts from the trustees of $1,000 and an invitation to move the school to Salisbury, North Carolina. And it was reopened. And in 1887, it was instituted by the state of North Carolina. Now, Bishop Hood served on the trustee board for over 30 years. And under the direction of the first dean of theology, Bishop George L. Blackwell, the School of Theology was named the Hood Theological Seminary. Today, the Hood Theological Seminary actually obtained its independence in 2001 and became a freestanding seminary. Now we have going to my beloved jurisdiction, most worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of North Carolina. Before we get into that, I will say that although I could not actually find the information, it has not been stated, but it has been somewhat documented that past Grandmaster Hood became a Mason around 1885 while he was in New York at the age of 24. Now, along with his brother-in-law, Paul Drayton, who was a past National Grand Master of the National Compact, they both was able to establish, and under the direction of most worshipful National Grand Master Richard H. Gleaves, they established King Solomon Lodge number 23 in Newbern, North Carolina, on September 27, 1875, where Bishop Hood was his first worshipful master. In 1866, in Wilmington, North Carolina, Giblin Lodge number 28 was established. 1867, Eureka Lodge number 30 in Fayetteville, North Carolina was established. And in 1867, Widow Son Lodge number 31 in Raleigh, North Carolina was established. Now, March 1st, 1870, all representatives of all four lodges got together in Wilmington, North Carolina, with the blessing of the National Grand Master Richard Gleaves, and the most worshipful Grand Lodge of North Carolina, free and accepted Ancient York Masons, was formed, with Bishop Hood being its first Grand Master. There were many name changes, but the resolution to change the name to its current name came at the Grand Session in 1944. During that time, it came from Bishop Brother Zach Alexander, who at the time was the Grand CCFC, and at the time the most worshipful Grand Master was the Honorable James E. Shepard. Finally, in 1876, Bishop Hood became a member of Jephthah Chapter Number 1 in Washington, North Carolina, where he served as patron. And in September of 1880, with 5 Eastern Star chapters, Jephthah Chapter Number 1 in Washington, Ruth Chapter Number 2 in Raleigh, Queen Esther Chapter Number 3 in Fayetteville, Jephthah Chapter Number 4 in Wilmington, and a fifth chapter in Smithfield, North Carolina. The most eminent Grand Chapter of Order Eastern Star for the state of North Carolina was established. Bishop Hood served as grand patron from 1880 to 1899. And of course, that name changed um, for our Grand Chapter Order of the Eastern Star came in 1922, and where at that time the Honorable James E. Shepard was elected to serve as the Grand Worthy Patron. Uh, and that is my presentation on our first Grand Master, Bishop James Walker Hood. There are so many things that could be said about Bishop Hood, and like Brother Morgan has stated, there is, I mean, there's so much that could be talked about that could not be put in this slide in a short amount of time. But there was especially once he claimed when he came down to North Carolina during and after the Civil War, so much that he has done. But I am definitely glad that I was able to do this presentation on our first Grand Master, Bishop James Walker Hood.
All right, thank you, Brother Jack, for that
Excellent
presentation as well. Yes, a lot of good work and good information to have. And it's always interesting, too, when you can find, you can research a lot of things, outside of your jurisdiction. But when you find that gem inside your jurisdiction, and I often talk about, and I talked about a little bit of tonight, making that connection or being able to make that connection, it makes that connection even more closer, when you can have that experience that you've talked about. So I think we're getting some feedback from someone on the line, but we'll do. So I'm up next, and I'm gonna, be honest with you. I will not do this brother any justice, both because of the research and the presentations that have already been done by Brother Morgan and Brother Jack, and just because this brother is so amazing. His life is so amazing. And I'll say it at the beginning of the presentation. I'll probably say it during the presentation, and I'll say it after the presentation. Someone really needs to make a movie, a full-length movie, a feature film, a current feature film about Brother Robert Smalls and the life that he lived, and the things that he's done or that he did during his life period. So
Can Dave Dillon starring it?
Hey, possibly. And there have been a couple snippets of his life. I don't know how many of our viewers watch Drunk History. For some reason, I just find that whole concept of getting people drunk and then telling history. For some reason, I find that fascinating. You don't have to worry about, I think sometimes some people think we're drunk when we're doing some of our presentations as well. But I can assure you, I can assure you about me, I'm not. But I can't about the other guests. I don't know. But little venues like that. I think Kevin Hart has something on his Black History Netflix film with his daughter as well, and they do a brief profile about Robert Smalls as well. But really, someone can really go in depth, and I think produce a great picture on this brother's life. So, without further ado, I'd like to present to you a brief presentation on Robert Smalls. So hopefully, let me see if I get this straight. Share screen. All right. Can y'all see my presentation?
No, I don't.
Hello?
I don't see it popping up.
You don't see it yet? Okay.
When you hit share screen, you should see the application window, and then I can put it up so everybody can see it.
Oh, okay. Yep, I see it now.
Oh, there we go. I see it now.
All right, cool. Thank you.
No problem. No problem, sir.
All right. So, Robert Smalls, he was born April 5th, 1839 in Beaufort, South Carolina. It's interesting. For some reason, the plantation owner's family really favored Brother Smalls over the other enslaved children of the plantation, so much so that his mother actually worried that he wouldn't develop, I guess, a sense of who he was and his relationship to, whites during that time, that he wouldn't understand the hardships of enslavement that that other people that looked like him experienced. So his mother actually arranged for him to be sent to the fields instead of working in the house. And so really think about that for a second, that, while working the house is, it's often been said, was a little easier than definitely working in the fields. His mother actually wanted him to have that experience so that he wouldn't think that everything was okay and that everything was, with the condition that they were in, that was okay. So she actually arranged for him to work in the fields where he did understand and he saw the horrors of slavery. He saw other enslaved Africans getting whipped, and getting punished and getting brutalized. So much so that as he grew older, witnessing that, it built a defiant nature within him. And he, and that was to the point where his mother, feared for his life. So I guess her experiment worked, but then it worked too well because he really resented, which a lot of enslaved Africans did during that time. He resented that treatment. And as he grew older, he became more defiant, like I said, and to the point where he would often end up in jail, for speaking out or for doing certain things. So once again, because of the relationship that his mother and Brother Smalls had with the plantation owner, she convinced him to allow him to move from Beaufort to Charleston so that they could he could work in Charlotte and his services could be rented out in Charlotte. So he moved to Charlotte, and while Brother Smalls was in Charlotte, he began to learn about the various waterways and the arts of being a seaman. He began working on the Planter, which was a lightly armored Confederate military transport ship under the command of the Charleston's district commander, Brigadier General Roswell S. Ripley. He also met his wife, Hannah, in Charleston, and they ended up, they were given permission to actually move into an apartment together where they had 2 kids. So again, understanding from an early age, because of the experience that his mom gave him, he understood the realities of the current plight of enslaved Africans in the South. And it was always at the forefront of his mind. He knew at any moment, at any time, that his family, unfortunately, could be separated. And again, going over history and thinking about that, I always try to, tell folks, try to, and it's hard, but try to place yourself in that position to where, you go to sleep, and we often hear this during this time period, you go to sleep with your family and you just hope, or you wake up with your family and then you hope by the end of the day that you can, all be together and, all go to bed together, because you just don't know if a loved one will be sold away, killed, or whatever. So this weighed heavily on his mind. And when he tried to buy the freedom of his wife and his 2 kids, but the price was too high. He had saved up about $100, but the plantation owner, a part of which she was a part of, he actually wanted $800 for the 3 of them, and he couldn't afford that. So, by this time, the hostilities are broken out between the North and the South, and word began to spread to enslaved blacks in the South that Navy commanders had been accepting runaways as contraband since that previous September. So Brother Smalls he made a decision that since he couldn't purchase the freedom of his family, he would use the skills that he acquired to escape in another way. So part of the duties of the ship that Robert Smalls worked on were to deliver dispatches, troops, and supplies, to survey the waterways, and to lay mines throughout the canal and throughout the other waters down in Charleston. So he was well aware of, again, where the mines were, how to navigate through all of that. And he became a real valuable asset to to the Confederacy actually initially because of his knowledge and his skill to operate the boat. He piloted the planner throughout Charleston Harbor and beyond on area rivers, and also along the South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida coast. So he was all over the place. So he got a keen sense of the area. So his escaping from slavery, if I can fast forward for a second, it was so extraordinary of what he did that afterwards the Navy actually investigated the whole matter, and they commissioned a committee to look into it. So what I'm about to read actually comes from the Navy committee report that was again commissioned to investigate Robert Small's actions, and the committee report states as follows. So on May 12, 1862, the planner traveled 10 miles southwest of Charleston to stop at Coles Island, a Confederate post on the Stono River that was being, at that time, being utilized by the Confederacy. It's three white officers, so the white officers of the planner, the ship that Robert Smalls worked on, the three white officers disembarked to spend the night ashore, leaving Smalls and the crew on board, as was the custom at that time. Once the white officers were on shore, Smalls confided his plan into the other enslaved Africans that were on board with him. Now, this is according to the report. Two chose to stay behind because they didn't think that plan would work, the plan that Smalls had. So at 2 a.m. on May 13th, Smalls, he actually put on the captain. So Captain Riley was the ship's captain. He put on his straw hat that he was known to wear. He put on a straw hat, and he ordered the other enslaved Africans to basically get the boat ready to sail away. He hoisted the South Carolina and the Confederate flags as a decoy. They eased off the dock in view of General Riley's headquarters, and they paused at the West Atlantic Wharf to pick up Small's children and his wife, along with 4 other women and 3 men and another child. So again, he had been thinking about this, and he had prepared his wife, kids, and a few other folks, and told them to be ready. So again, they set sailed a little bit, picked up his family and some other folks, and they continued to sail. At 3:25 a.m., the planner accelerated. And this is again coming from the report. From the pilot house, Small blows the ship's whistle while passing Confederate Forts Johnson and at 4:15 a.m. Fort Sumter, as coolly as if General Riley was on board. Smalls, he not only knows all of the right Navy signals to flash, he also, again, from sailing on the boat, he noticed that the captain had this he used to fold his arms a lot, and people just knew him for sailing on a boat and folded his arms. So he went out in front of the boat, folded his arms. He knew this was dead of night, and they couldn't tell if it was Captain Riley or if it was someone else. They just automatically assumed it was Captain Riley. So he went outside the boat, folded his arms as they went past these various people. Later on, when all of this stuff, or after this, it was discovered an hour later, an actual Confederate aide, and his name was F.G. Ravenel. He became defensive, and he explained in a letter that, talking about the ship, and because he wanted to know how did this happen. And he wrote that, talking about the ship, she was supposed to be the guard boat and allowed to pass without interruption. It is only when the planner passes out of rebel gun range that the alarm is sounded. So they didn't realize what had happened until well after Robert Smalls had took the boat, sailed it down the canal, and was just past their defenses. They didn't realize it in the minute after they did, they flipped the alarm, but by that time it was too late. So Robert Smalls, he had started sailing the boat toward the naval blockade of the Union Army, because he knew that, again, from the reports that was circulating around the harbor and what the other enslaved Africans knew, that if he made it there, then he would make it to freedom for him and his family and the others that were on board. So once they got past the Confederate Army, he ordered his crew to take down the flags, the Confederate flag and the South Carolina flag, and to put up a white bed sheet that his wife had bought on board to signify to the Union Army that they came in peace and that they were giving up. So because it was still nighttime, the Union Army actually couldn't see the white bed sheet. So this comes from the boat was coming, but they thought it was the Confederate boat coming towards them to attack them. So this is from a following eyewitness account of the event. So just as the number 3 gun port was being elevated and being prepared to be fired, someone cried out, "I see something that looks like a white flag." As the boat neared us, we looked in vain for the face of a white man. When they discovered that we would not fire upon them, there was a rush of contrabands out on our deck, some dancing, some singing, whistling, jumping up and down, and just happy. As a steamer came near and under the stern of the Onward, one of the colored men stepped forward, taking off his hat, shouted, "Good morning, sir. I've bought you some of the old United States guns, sir." That man is Robert Smalls, and he and his family and the entire enslaved African crew of the Planter were now free. So Smalls actually turned the ship over to the U.S. Army at that time. He was given, he and the other enslaved Africans that were on board were actually giving a reward for it. By all accounts, they were, they weren't actually given what they should have been given, which was the value of the ship, but they were given some money for turning that ship over. And he actually, when he turned it over, it had carried 4 loose artillery pieces from Coles Island, and it had 200 rounds or 200 pounds, of ammunition. But more valuable than that, it had a captain's book containing all of the Confederate signals and a map of the mines and the torpedoes and just the different things that the Confederate Navy had laid out in Charleston Harbor. Small's own extensive knowledge also was very valuable of the Charleston's waterways and the military configuration that he provided. Again, that was valuable as well to them. This intelligence allowed the Union forces to actually capture Coles Island and a string of batteries on May 20th, a week after. So just after a week after he had escaped, he had given them so much knowledge that they were able to go down there and capture that island. And the Union would hold that inlet as a base for the remaining 3 years of the war. So Robert Smalls went on to actually serve in the military. And again, using his knowledge of the area, he said that he had actually participated in well over 13 various missions throughout his military career. After the war, with the money that he had received, not only from turning over the Planter, he also, paid a little stipend for his service as well. He actually, after the Emancipation Proclamation and the war, like I said, he actually went back to the plantation that he and his family was on, and he bought the house and bought the plantation. So again, imagine that, this place that provided so much horror, he was able to go back and purchase it for his family. He actually he moved his mother in to take care of her until she died, and he actually moved in the wife of his old plantation owner for a time being as well. I like to say, when I did this presentation for my lodge last week, I like to say that I think he did that just so she can see that, a black man living in it, bought the house that, at one point in time that they owned. So I viewed that as a very, very powerful thing that he did when he purchased that house. He also built a school for African-American kids within the community. And then he also became very active in politics as well. In 1868, he was elected to the South Carolina House of Representatives. He was a very effective leader in the House of Representatives, and he introduced the Homestead Act and also introduced other things as well to help the recently freed enslaved Africans. In 1874, he was actually elected to the United States House of Representatives, where he served 2 terms from 1875 to 1879, and then also from 1882 to 1883. Smalls died of malaria and diabetes in 1915 at the age of 75. Brother Smalls was a member of the Sons of Beaufort Lodge, number 36, located in Beaufort, South Carolina. He was also a contemporary and a business partner of Rebels, as was mentioned earlier in another presentation. They own a couple businesses together in South Carolina as well. One of the quotes that stood out for me that he actually said one time was, "My race needs no special defense, for the past history of them in this country proves them to be the equal of any people anywhere. All they need is an equal chance in the battle of life." And I think with that, Brother Smalls, he and that again, it well more details. I skimmed over a lot of stuff, but it's just amazing that someone started from where he started from and then ended where he ended, and it just shows you the power that people had, and the the fact that I think he was thinking from day one, like, I'm not going to stay in this situation. I need to use my knowledge that I have and figure out a way to get my family and I out of this situation and this predicament. And I applaud that thought. Again, when I made this presentation earlier in the week, I did the formal presentation, and then I did a synopsis of it where I said, basically, you had a man take his knowledge. He stole a ship. One of my past masters said this quite possibly could have been the first jacking of anything in the history of the world. But this brother jacked a whole ship, not a wagon, not a horse. He took a ship. And because they really didn't think that would happen, or that could happen, or that we had the knowledge to do that, he stole a whole ship, knew how to maneuver around the mines it was placed in, everything, and literally sailed to freedom, and then went back and served and was a tremendous asset to this country, and a true patriot. When we talk about patriots, he was a true patriot of this country. So I applaud him. And again, like I said, we need to do something. I don't know if we need to start a petition, contact someone. They need to make a movie about this man's life, because it's tremendous. And not only that portion of it, but his political career. I really skimmed over that. That was truly amazing too. So that's all I have for Brother Robert Smalls. Thank you.
Awesome job, sir.
Outstanding.
Right.
Outstanding.
Yeah. So as always, questions. Do you have any questions from our audience, Brother Morgan?
Actually, our audience, I don't know what's going on now. I'm asking for the questions, and I think I saw maybe one or two. Let's go to our viewer comments and see what we got going on. I've been asking everybody in the chat to post their questions. They're posting comments, but not a lot of questions tonight. Okay. I did see one that was for Brother Jack, which I think you kind of touched on already, which was regarding the where Bishop Hood originally joined Freemasonry. That was the one question I did see. I can't find it now to post it, but Brother Jack, I think
I think that was B-Side Pro. I see it right now. He asked the question: is there evidence of the lodge in which past Grandmaster Hood was made. You mentioned him residing in Delaware. Was he a member of a lodge under the jurisdiction of African Harmony Grand Lodge, free and accepted ancient York Masons? No, a lot of the information that I received, that I looked up, pointed to past Grandmaster Hood becoming a Mason around 1855 while he was in New York. Um, Again, the actual lodge that he was raised under, that has not come to surface, but it does talk about the year and the approximate age that he was when he became a Mason. So, no, it was not in Delaware. It is believed that he did become a Mason under while he was in New York. And the amazing thing about that is, um, his brother was also Grand Master in New York. Brother Levi Hood was Grand Master also during that time. As a matter of fact, um, when past Grand Master Paul Drayton came out as the Grand Master of the National Compact, and Richard H. Gleaves went in, his brother, I believe, according to the proceedings, his brother Levi Hood was the National Grand Senior Deacon, if I'm not mistaken, and Bishop Hood was a district deputy. I have to go through those proceedings again, but I do want to at this time thank um, my brother in Masonry and my brother in Alpha, brother Ludwig Hall, under the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of New York, who's also a past Worshipful Grand Historian, who provided me with the proceedings of that time. So to answer that question, no, not in Delaware. It was in New York.
Very good, thank you. Let's see here. We got a comment from Javon Greenaway, who said that Martin Delany is his favorite Prince Hall Mason. He also played a role in him, and by him I mean Brother Greenaway becoming a Prince Hall Mason as well. So Brother Greenaway and I, apparently I'm in good company because Brother Greenaway also shares that same affinity for Martin Delany's life. I've actually often been. You can also sometimes hear me say to people that I feel like I'm Martin Delany reincarnated, because there's a lot of things with me and him that's that just a little coincidental. So maybe I was here before,
Yeah, and Brother Morgan, I don't know, did you? I'm sorry, did you mention during your presentation too the role he played as far as being a worshipful master of the lodge that made those brothers from Ohio that actually
Actually, I
traveled?
didn't. Actually,
Yeah.
I did not. And I a thousand
Oh, it's
apologies
okay.
about that. I did
Yeah.
not. So at the time, Saint Cyprian Lodge was, as you know, Brother Caffey, was the first lodge really to go west, if I'm not mistaken, one of the first lodges in that western move for Prince Hall Masonry, going west of the Alleghenies and all that stuff. And so it played a very central role, as you know, and I'm sure if folks go back and check our episodes on Ohio and Pennsylvania, you'll see that St. Cyprian Lodge played a very important role in the spread of Prince Hall Masonry into Western Pennsylvania and into Ohio, and really from there all points west. So in some regards, St. Cyprian Lodge is a mother lodge, not just of Ohio, but really of Black Masonry in the West. I think we can make that argument, right?
Yep. I'll
So
say
yeah,
so.
definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see here. This is one of my favorite comments of tonight. DMC Young says, Brother James Morgan is all about that scholarship. Good work. Thank you, DMC
Oh,
Young. Let them know.
of
They
course, that
probably
would be
doubt me.
your
Let them know
favorite.
that.
Now, how is that a question? I
Let
don't see
them
no
know.
question mark or anything. And
Oh no, he just said that was his
his
favorite. That's what
favorite.
he said.
Okay.
That was his
Yeah, it's
favorite.
one of my favorites. One of my favorites. Look, you asked me, right?
Right. Right.
Look, that's what you get for giving me the
There
microphone.
you go.
Let's see here. Now I did see a couple questions did come in here. I saw one that came in asking about. Okay, here we go, from Carolina Blackman. It said it's pretty obvious, but can we speak on the importance and spread of Prince Hall Masonry during and after the Civil War in the Southern states?
Yeah.
Hmm?
Yeah. I mean, one of the things is, you know, I think it along with the Black church it really helped build the communities in those
Absolutely.
states, and it
Absolutely.
provided communities, for the free brothers and sisters down there. So it helped build those communities, those schools, and that really just provided them a sense of, I think, a sense of structure, that was needed during that time. I think it's and it went again. I always say, I think, Brother Walks hit on it in several of his writings as far as the closeness of the Black church and Prince Howard Freemasonry, and how and what it did for us during that time period was amazing.
Absolutely. I mean, when I look at doing the research on past Grandmaster Hood and understanding the how important um, New Bern, North Carolina, really is. Just once again, prior to the Civil War, just the number of um, freed and freed blacks and ex-slaves who lived there, and how they build schools and relief societies and things of that nature. And even with Bishop Hood himself, looking at his history, I mean, he helped build, establish hundreds and hundreds of churches, and that was just a small portion of what he did. And to answer the question, a lot of at least here in North Carolina, the spread of Prince Hall Masonry mainly took place post Civil War. Civil War technically ending in 1865. So in 2 years, after that, the first lodge in New Bern, North Carolina, King Solomon 23, which is now King Solomon number 1, was started in New Bern, North Carolina, and spread. So the eastern portion of North Carolina, especially where the seaports were. I mean, that's where you have a lot of a lot of the history and the spread that went from east westward. So it definitely had its importance, not just the spread of Prince Hall Masonry, but the spread of Black churches as well.
What those two said, but also check out the episode that we did way back. I think that was in 2016. I don't even remember what year it was, but we did an episode on Prince Hall Freemasonry and Reconstruction. So I definitely want to encourage everybody check. Make sure you check out our back catalog. We definitely highlighted the importance of Prince Hall Freemasonry during the spread and Reconstruction and whatnot. There's really not much more that I can add to what the brothers have already said. So definitely make sure you check that out. Let's see here. We got some other questions now. Now everybody's they're coming in with the questions now, good brother. So hang tight with me for 1 second. I got a question here. Actually, there's a question that's directed at me. From Wisdom and Peace 1991, who asked, James Morgan, were there many Buffalo Soldiers that were Freemasons? The answer to that question is yes, there were. I think that's probably an episode maybe we could touch on at a later date. Cause I don't think we ever discussed talking about the Buffalo Soldiers, although we have talked about Prince Hall Masonry in the United States Armed Forces. We've never really focused on the Buffalo Soldiers. But to answer the question, yes, there were. If you get the book Black Square and Compass, there's an entire chapter titled "Those Magnificent Masonic Buffalo Soldiers." I believe that's close to the title of that chapter, where Brother Walks highlights that quite a bit. I am proud to say, hold on 1 second here. I am proud to say that if you get a copy of my book, The Lost Empire, Black Freemasonry in the Old West, that I actually found and documented the history of two of the earliest, what I found, at this time, what I believe to be the first two Prince Hall lodges that were attached to the Buffalo Soldiers. Those lodges were titled 10th Cavalry Military Lodge number 21 and Cedar Beam Military Lodge number 28. They both were chartered by the Most Worshipful King Solomon Grand Lodge of Kansas, which was a Grand Lodge under the National Grand Lodge structure. And so my book basically is a history of that Grand Lodge. So I would encourage you to check that out, but also check out Brother Walks' writing as well, because he really goes. He doesn't capture the information that I found, but he captures a lot of the information following that, as far as showing the different military lodges, particularly out of Missouri, that were linked to the United States, to the Buffalo Soldiers, which was the 9th and 10th Cavalry.
Brother Morgan, didn't I believe Brother Darrell Hodge touched on that a little bit as well.
Absolutely.
He touched on that as well with his in his book with the jurisdiction of Oklahoma.
Absolutely, yes. Because the important thing about the Buffalo Soldiers, and particularly with those early lodges, particularly 10th Cavalry and Cedar Beam, is that those lodges were the first ones to go into what we call the Oklahoma Territory and the Indian Territory, which is now the state of Oklahoma. So Brother Hodge does touch on it in his book. I think, and this is with all due respect to Brother Hodge, of course, I think I go a little more in depth into that in my book, but he definitely touches on it as well. No doubt about it. Let's see here. We got another question coming in from Shavar Sampson, who asks, how can you get more information about this topic? And he says he's thankful to learn from us brothers. So, brothers, where would you recommend that he go for more information on Prince Hall Masonry and the Civil War?
Well, I think one of the books you hit on, Brother Walks, Black Square and Compass, I think that would be a start, in regards to, some type of foundation. I guess I like, John Henry Clark said, I remember he came to Ohio State many moons ago when I went there, and he had said it in some of his lectures, and he said that, he had learned that, from his teachers and folks that, Black history is just the missing pages of American history. So, not necessarily anything separate. It's all in one. It's just not there. So, I said that to say you can start by looking at the history of your, I don't know what jurisdiction you may belong to, but, reading the history of his jurisdiction, reading the history of his lodges, and then finding those names, or looking at, okay, what else was going on during that time period. When I first started researching my lodge many years ago, and I came upon these names, and then I'm reading some other just regular history stuff, and I started seeing a lot of the names and that was affiliated with my lodge also in some of these other history books as well. So, I guess from a research perspective, you really want to delve into the research of it, first looking at the history of your jurisdiction and finding some commonalities. But as far as a book which is just already written, you have a lot of brothers that have written books around those time periods that would give some of that information as well. And Brother Morgan's, can speak to that, I'm sure, and Brother Jack as well.
Absolutely.
What he said.
There you go. The Civil War is something I'm very passionate about. Again, I have two actual so it's actually one of my jobs. I have two streams of income and one of them actually is working with the African American Civil War Museum and Memorial. And I highly encourage you to come and visit with us. I'm very proud to say that I've tried to help the museum in recognizing the importance of Prince Hall Masonry to United States Colored Troop history. One of the exhibits I'm actually working on that's going to be going into the new building, and I'll be honest with you all, I was actually very on the fence about what my topic was going to be, because I almost started to talk about Bishop Henry McNeil Turner tonight, because I'm working on an exhibit on him. And so, and he himself was a very active Prince Hall Mason, and his son John Payne Turner was Grand Master here in DC. So I definitely encourage you to come visit with us. And there are several other museums as well, because we don't want you to just. The thing about the Prince Hall Think Tank is we don't just want you to sit here and watch our episodes. We want you to get up and go out and do the research yourself, as well as bring information back to your lodge or chapter meetings. That's a very important thing, and we can't stress that enough. As far as books that we can recommend, I definitely recommend checking out, like Brother Caffey said, Black Square and Compass. Obviously, I'm going to promote my book, Brother Hodges' book. All of our authors are Prince Hall Think Tank authors, right? But another one I definitely want to recommend is A Brave Black Regiment, which is a history of the United States Colored Troops coming out of the 54th Regiment. So if anyone's seen the film Glory is telling the story that's in, well, not the film Glory is based on the story of the book. The book is better, so get the book. And in there, they actually talk about, and Brother Walks actually cites in his book the story of William H.W. Gray, who was a sergeant in that regiment and who actually got the very first known charter for a Prince Hall Military Lodge. So right at the beginning of Black military service in the Civil War, you have them establishing lodges, okay? Something that we didn't touch on tonight as much as maybe we should have is the importance of Prince Hall military lodges during the Civil War, which Brother Walks talks about quite a bit. So we know there was one attached to the 54th Massachusetts, as well as there was another lodge known as Phoenix Lodge, which was attached to the 26th Regiment from New York, right? So definitely check those books out. As far as my presentation goes, I also would recommend. Literally, about a year or so ago, I realized how much of Martin Delany's books I was missing in hardcover. So literally, I went out and purchased a bunch of Martin Delany books and read them. So anything Martin Delany, check that out as well.
I would say, for me, this particular presentation here that I've done is actually the very first historical presentation that I put together. And what I will say, when you do research, especially on a historical perspective, be prepared to connect the dots. And so, in doing so, for example, on my presentation, in order to, learn about Bishop Hood, I had to learn more about New Bern. From New Bern, and I had to learn more about what went on with the Confederacy and the Union soldiers, and doing so, understanding that he's from. Born in Pennsylvania, understanding the differences with slavery between Delaware and Pennsylvania since he was on the state line. Some of the things that he was a part of, whether it been the Colored Conventions movement or the Freedmen's Bureau, you're gonna end up connecting the dots and say, okay, he was a part of this. Well, what is this? Why was he? What was so important for him to be a part of that? So you're going to end up connecting the dots, and the more dots you connect, the more you understand there's just a wide range of information that's going to come together, and it makes you look and be like, wow, like this is truly amazing. Just the things that brothers did, not just in those times, but times of civil rights. We was talking about that earlier. So, be ready to connect the dots in order to truly understand what that person, what that person is, what that person has done. You have to be able to understand what it is that that person was a part of. And like Brother Caffey said, definitely start with your jurisdiction. Start with your lodge. Start, when your lodge was founded. Who were the first officers of your lodge? What did they do? How did they contribute? So on and so forth. So that's that's the advice that I would give.
Absolutely, absolutely. And again, I want to stress everybody in Prince Hall Masonry should have the Origin Objects Ancient Freemasonry by Martin Delany. I definitely want to stress that tonight, along with other Delany stuff. But absolutely. Let's see here. We've got a couple more questions coming in, folks. So bear with us. Wisdom and Peace wants to know, were Prince Hall Masons in the Civil War treated as brothers by white brothers during the same period? I would say that's actually a really good question. I would say, from what I know, the historical record really doesn't really speak to that as much. I don't know that. I mean, I'm not going to say that it could have never happened, but I couldn't document that. So I would argue that there's probably more likely that they probably were treated as race relations were at that time, not with the level of respect that they should have been for the most part. Not to say there weren't elements or what have you. The reason why we even know that the Massachusetts 54th Regiment had a lodge is because it was documented by a white soldier, Captain Louis F. Emilio, who writes this in his history of the regiment. But beyond that, I really couldn't speak to it as much. I will say that, and this is kind of me being petty, so y'all just let me be petty for 15 seconds. There's a statue at Gettysburg, the friend to a friend, or brother to brother statue up there, which shows a soldier. I think it's a Confederate soldier who's dying, and a Union soldier who's holding him because they both realize they're Masons, and there's this whole story behind it. And I'm not really a big fan of that statue. I'll be perfectly honest with you. I recognize that Freemasonry split America. Excuse me. The Civil War split America, and so you did have Masons on the Union side and on the Confederate side, both who were fighting against each other, right? And sometimes you did have blood relations fighting against each other during the Civil War. But every time I see that statue, in my mind, I also see this white Union soldier dying Confederate soldier because they're both Masons, and in my mind there's like this Prince Hall Mason who's like help, but he's not getting any help because they're like so busy dealing with each other. But that's
yeah. I mean that we one of the common themes that I think you've heard on all of our shows since we've started when we talk about certain things is that could be a show in and of itself. Like the show will be about a specific thing, and then one nugget, you could actually produce a whole show. So that would be an interesting show to talk about. But yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Carolina Blackman asked the question: what Confederate state was the first to have a Prince Hall Lodge during the war? That's actually a trick question. I don't know if Carolina Blackman realizes that. Anybody else want to take a stab at it? You want me to do it, or
go ahead?
I'll let you have that one.
Well, see, technically speaking, it would be Louisiana because Louisiana had Prince Hall Masonry there.
Yeah.
Before the war.
Yeah.
And then the Grand Lodge started doing the war. So technically it's Louisiana if you're going to be, if you're going to go there.
And then what did I just get through saying about an ongoing theme?
Right.
That could be a show in and of itself.
Yeah.
You had a lodge, or you had a Grand Lodge, or you had Prince Hall Freemasonry actually operating within a slave holding state, not after, but before that whole thing broke out, and actually during too. So that's an interesting story that we hope to one day be able to present to you all.
Absolutely. Right. Let's see here. We had a question that came in about was Nathan Beth. Let's see. Trey the Third. I'm trying to get some different folks who asked questions. Trey the Third asked. He asked me, was Civil War General Nathan Bedford Forrest a Mason? I think he was. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure he was.
I think it depends not only on who you ask, but I think what the intent of the question, because every time he comes up, obviously he's often brought up with the Klan, and then you try to make that connection between he and Pike, and then it leads down to it opens up a whole nother conversation that oftentimes can be contentious, or it depends on where you're having it at. It can be very contentious within, the Masonic world. So, but I think there's some research out there that he was a Mason.
Absolutely. I saw another question that came in, which was asking, let me see, about Frederick Douglass again. Again, Frederick Douglass was not a Mason. Carl Anderson asked, was Frederick Douglass or Isaac Myers a Masons? And I believe if Isaac Myers was, we didn't talk about him in this episode, but Isaac Myers was a Grand Master in Maryland. But that we didn't talk about that tonight. So yeah. Anyone else? Last call here. This is a good one here. Parker Hardy wants to know, was Harriet Tubman a member of the Order of the Eastern Star? This is a good one.
I don't think so. I don't think there's anything out there that says that, is it?
No,
I've never heard her.
Not that
She
I've
was
heard.
she was too busy working. She
right.
didn't. She wouldn't have
Right.
time.
Right.
And by the time she got through working, she was so tired and she deserved a well rest. So no,
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. As a matter of fact, if there is anything out there, are hard at work looking that up right now, and maybe they'll come back and say, "Hey, y'all, we found something," but we ain't heard it yet. So we're gonna wait back on that one. Oh, Ruben Sinclair, thank you so much. Ruben Sinclair said that my book is going to be his birthday present. Oh no, it's not Ruben. I'm sorry, Malcolm Prophet said that. So thank you, Malcolm Prophet. So much for that support. I appreciate it. Other than that, looks like we're pretty much good on the questions this evening.
Okay.
So, Brother Caffey, I'll turn it back over to you.
All right. So thanks, brothers, for that great presentation. Also, thanks to our audience again for the great questions. So we'll just move into our closing thoughts right now. We'll start out with Brother Morgan.
Hey, again, oh, wait. Ruben Sinclair also asked about Sojourner Truth. No, Sojourner Truth. No, we couldn't speak to that either. No, she was not at Eastern Star as far as we know. But anyway, back to closing thoughts. I'm just so thankful to be on this show with you all. As always, I want to encourage you all to please go out and support those books that we talked about earlier. We could literally do an entire episode on Bishop James Walker Hood, on Brother Robert Smalls, and on Martin Delany, as well as a number of other people who we just didn't have time to talk about. And I'm quite sure that this will not be the last time that we touch on this subject in various ways. I want to encourage you all to continue supporting us. You know, we do this because we love it. Continue to like, share, and subscribe. I know that I will be in about a little over a week. I will be coming down to Raleigh, North Carolina. So I know that Brother Jack has stationed guards at all of the entryways and waterways to North Carolina. But guess what? I'm coming. I'm not going to tell you how I'm coming, but I'm going to get there for the Philaxis conference. So
I've
if
allowed you
you're in
entry,
Raleigh or
sir.
in the area, come check us out and look forward to seeing you. Oh man, I got permission. Yes. Yeah, I thought that I wasn't gonna be allowed in. So we're gonna walk through the front door, and I look forward to seeing everybody in North Carolina. So if you're in Raleigh, come check us out at the Philaxis conference. I'll be there basically the whole time. So not this week coming, but the week following. I'll be in Raleigh, and if you hear gunshots and sirens, I had nothing to do with it.
Yeah. All right, Brother Jack, closing thoughts, sir.
Yes, sir. Tonight I'm going to have to pull a Ken Collins, if you don't mind. And once again, my reasoning for doing so, this coming week, actually next Sunday, March 1st, we will the jurisdiction of North Carolina will officially have been in existence for 150 years. This Friday, February 28th through Sunday, March 1st, we will be having a sesquicentennial celebration in Wilmington, North Carolina, which once again, where the first four lodges got together and decided and established our Grand Lodge, and 150 years later, here we are. So definitely have to give a shout out to my jurisdiction, North Carolina, for 150 years of existence. Once again, it is always a pleasure to be on the show and to impart light and knowledge to those who are watching. Thank you so much for the support. For those who for the Maryland jurisdiction, I will be in Maryland this Tuesday. This Tuesday and Wednesday. This Tuesday, I will be at Samuel J. Ennis Lodge number 106, providing a lecture. My lecture for that night is the third pillar. And that Wednesday, I will be at I.H. Claiborne Consistory number 363. And I actually had a topic, but a good friend of mine told me that this Wednesday is Ash Wednesday. So definitely my lecture for that evening actually has been changed to the Word of God. So for those of you in the Maryland jurisdiction, I hopefully be able to come out and enjoy. And Brother Morgan, I definitely look forward to seeing you the following Friday, March 6th, here for the Philaxis convention. I think
Yes,
you and I will be getting together that evening for our presentation, and I'll be doing a presentation early that morning. So definitely look forward to it. So once again, thank you so much, and can't wait to do it again next month.
All right. Thanks, brothers. And once again, as you heard this evening, but a lot of our members, played varying roles during this time period of the Civil War. History is a funny thing, the history of the craft during the Civil War period. It's a remarkable thing. And as I stated earlier, I think one of the most remarkable things is right after the Civil War and the role that Prince Hart Freemasonry played, along with the Black church once again, and how we migrated south and helped free Blacks establish themselves and build communities of hopes and build communities of dreams as well. So thanks for joining us again tonight. We hope you've gained a little insight, and we hope you join us on all future broadcasts of the Prince Hart Think Tank. Have a good evening. And I often, end all of the episodes with let's teach masonry in our lodges, which again, that's important. Let's teach masonry in our lodges. But I wanted to end tonight's episode with Brother Smalls hijacked the ship to get his freedom. Please understand that this brother took a ship, sailed it, picked up his family and friends, and was out. So if he can do that, we should be able to do something to get, what we need as well. So have a good evening, and thanks for joining us. We look forward to seeing you again next month. Have a good evening.
Good night, everybody.